but close to 3,000 will still be cut. An official review into the NHS will be published tomorrow and is expected to highlight mishandling of healthcare spending. Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper, has told LBC the Tories have a lot to answer for.
All the money that should have been spent on rebuilding our hospitals, rebuilding our general practice, surgeries as well, was being raided to pay for the day-to-day costs of staff wages. And so we've got this unprecedented situation where we have a workforce crisis, we have a buildings crisis, we have a crisis in our primary care. And I hope that what we see tomorrow are some recommendations about how we start to fix that.
And the government says new housing laws will make things fairer between tenants and landlords. Rental reforms have been introduced in Parliament today, including an end to no-fault evictions. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 12 points at 81.93. The pound buys $1.30 and €1.18. LBC weather. Showers easing for most areas tonight, feeling chilly with a low of 5. Another breezy day tomorrow with a mixture of sunny spells and showers mainly in the north and west. Drier later in the day with a high of 15. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
No-fault evictions will finally be banned for England's 11 million renters. Julie's in Mansfield.
I was served a no-fault eviction on Tuesday. 14 years since I moved into this property. I was given 7 days' notice.
Mike in Southwark.
I think I've been a very good landlord for the last 15 years. I'm actually about a week away from putting my property on the market. I've made no money for the last probably 3 to 4 years on that property.
Have you lost money?
I actually net zero. So the only money I make is probably on the capital. So when I eventually sell it, there will be a profit based on what I've purchased it for.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7.
With Betfair, where odds move faster than polls. Play responsibly.
LBC. This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
And it's Simon Marks sitting in again tonight for Ian Dale and once again in the chair for Cross Question. A reminder that we do this every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, right after the news at 8. Your chance to put questions to a panel of 4 prominent guests joining me around the table to address anything that is on your mind this evening. And tonight's panel comprises John McDonnell, the Member of Parliament for Hayes and Harlington, currently suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party, Alex Burghart, the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary and Conservative MP for Brentwood and Ongar, the journalist and author Eleanor Mills. She is the founder of noon.org.uk, a platform aimed at middle-aged women, and James Heale, political correspondent for The Spectator. And you can ask them anything you like, as the Chancellor is warning once again that she is making some very difficult decisions ahead of next month's budget. You might want to ask about the choices she faces. You might consider asking about internal party discipline, since we've got John McDonnell here dealing with his own personal experience of that particular issue. You might be wondering what the panel thought might be the impact of last night's Kamala Harris-Donald Trump debate on the outcome of the US presidential election. Or you might have questions about that very long Tory leadership contest now that Priti Patel and Mel Stride have left the island. Whatever is on your mind on Cross Question, you set the agenda with your question. And remember that while you are perfectly at liberty to listen to us on the radio, if you'd like to see what we look like, you can watch us now in Vision, streaming on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
And without further ado, let's get to the first question of the night, which is coming this evening from Howard in Greenford. Howard, what's your question for the panel?
Right. Good evening, panel. In view of what I thought was Kamala Harris's excellent performance on the debate last night, do you think that America is ready for a female president? And why has Labour never had a female leader?
John McDonnell.
That's a good question. Yes, I think America is, of course, is ready for a woman president. And I think it will be Kamala Harris. Watching that debate last night, I just thought Trump, he seemed to be losing it, to be honest. It was almost like, in some times, it was almost like a Biden moment. And that worries me because, you could have a person, he could still win this election, and I just don't think he'll be competent, and I find that worrying. But I think she will. Why hasn't the Labour Party? I think that's a really good question, because when Jeremy Corbyn stood down, I backed Becky Long-Bailey because I wanted a woman candidate, and we've got some tremendous women front benchers, and I think the Labour Party really does need to look at itself, because I think we do need to demonstrate that we should, and of course you want to elect the best person, and to be honest, I thought in that instance Becky Long-Bailey was the best person, so it is something the Labour Party definitely has to look at.
John, is it an embarrassment to the Labour Party?
Yes, it is. I'll interrupt you. Yes, it is. It is. I'm deeply embarrassed about it, and that we had in the past as well. It's almost it's difficult to understand how it's happened, but in the past, Margaret Beckett was deputy leader and then a sort of temporary leader in between things. I backed Margaret Beckett when she ran for leader, because I thought she was really good, experienced and wise as well. So I think, it's something the Labour Party's got to look at, definitely.
And so, Alex Burghart, your answer, first of all, to Howard's question, in view of Kamala Harris's performance in the debate, is America ready for a female president?
Yeah, I think, as John said, I think America's certainly ready for it. And I didn't see the debates last night, but I talked to a few people who have. And it seems that she won the public view of it in fairly decisive fashion in quite a divided country. And I think that's pretty interesting. I think that there's also this case that, the fortunes in this presidential election have really swung around. And I think it'd be pretty foolhardy to assume there isn't another twist coming.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that, Team Trump is very sophisticated, and America is pretty, turbulent at the moment. So I wouldn't rule anything out. I mean, on the female leader thing, going to John's point, Harriet Harman was an acting leader at one point, wasn't she?
It's always been in between the leadership elections.
And it's been one of those areas where the Conservatives have just for a long time have been much better than Labour, I suppose.
And if it's a matter of embarrassment for Labour that they've not had a female leader, is it a matter of pride for the Conservatives that they've had three of them?
I think it might be because the men have been so atrocious.
I don't think Liz Truss is doing anything particularly great for women.
I think Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May. I'm backing a woman in the leadership contest as you.
Must be.
It is, exactly, and who I think is enormously capable and has the potential to be really one of the great politicians of the next 10 or 20 years. And I'm certainly proud of the party's record in this area, but I can see that it's got a future, not just a past.
Okay, Eleanor Mills.
I think that Kamala Harris yesterday was brilliant. I mean, I have to say, as a woman looking at it, compared to looking at two old gits, the kind of Biden and Trump, to see Kamala kind of glossy, smiley, clever, talking about a new generation of leadership, kind of coming in, talking about abortion and what's been going on in America and those kind of basic rights for women being taken away. I think that is very persuasive for, half the population in the States. I was listening to a phone-in just before I came in where there was some Republican women talking about their daughters and how they thought it was incredibly important that they had those reproductive rights. And then Taylor Swift coming in, backing Kamala, and really digging into what Vance, Vice President, Trump's Vice Vance has been saying about women, about childless cat women. I think
she literally signed that Instagram announcement. Basically, I am a childless cat woman
in this tweet, and she's got 283 million followers.
550 million followers.
287 million, they said, or something.
But that might be on one platform.
Oh, okay.
Taken together, because I was looking it up today. Over 550 million social media followers.
Well, and in America, that's a lot, and we know that she really sways the younger generation. So I think that there's something here about being younger, being female, and if we look at kind of Vance and Trump, there aren't very many female votes there. I mean, he's really annoyed all single, kind of child-free women, which is about 25% of women. It's not a minority now who don't have children.
He also made comments last week that were just astonishing, relating to marriages and to the advancement of the availability of divorce in the United States, saying that from his viewpoint, the prevalence of divorce in the United States had allowed women who were in abusive marriages to leave those marriages to the detriment, he argued, of the family, of the kids in those relationships, which in an election in which the votes of women, particularly in places like the Philadelphia suburbs, are going to be absolutely key, is an astonishing thing to say.
I think it's a real own goal. There's a very excellent piece by Helen Lewis from The Atlantic on the Drudge Report today, which is looking at everything that Vance has been saying about women. I mean, he basically thinks that all menopausal women should just be grandmothers and looking after children. He said some terrible things about kind of childcare, and I think that is really tin-eared. If you think that women are half the electorate, I think part of the reason I think Kamala will win is because she looks modern, she looks thoughtful, she attacked Trump as a dynamic and as a prosecutor, and she was also amazingly emotionally acute because she went for Trump's ego. You know, when she says, people leave your rallies, what Trump should have done is ignore that and attack her on the economy or attack her on immigration. And of course, he's such an egomaniac that he can't bear the idea that somebody might be leaving his rally. So he played into it every time. And then the crazy stuff about eating cats. I mean, cats have become a bit of a kind of, a theme of this election. So I thought that, I agree with John, that I thought that Trump seemed really quite unhinged. I mean, compared to her, because she looks plausible, modern, female, all those kind of good young things, and he looks like a doddery old weirdo.
James Heale, he also looked old in that debate last night up against her. Do you think America is ready now to get behind her and elect a female president?
I do, and I think that's partly what sort of Eleanor's just been talking about in terms of Kamala Harris's own ability to kind of perform. There was a lot of questions because she has ducked scrutiny throughout this whole campaign thus far, having burst on the scene late and not faced a primary like traditional candidates have. But also Donald Trump was his own worst enemy in all of this, and the fact, for instance, that after the debate he went into the spin room and tried talking to the journalists. I mean, when you're a hole, stop digging. I think says plenty about him, and obviously sometimes Donald Trump's great gift at times has been his rhetoric in terms of cutting through and talking in a way which, for instance, other Republicans couldn't, but it's also turning his weapon against him, and sort of from a Republican point of view it's a sort of Greek tragedy in that respect.
But I do think he went into that spin room thinking that he was taking a victory lap, because in all of his communications since the debate he's insisted it was his greatest debate performance ever.
Of course, but then the one after Biden previously a few months ago, he didn't do that as well, and I think that perhaps shows that even you've had a sort of slam dunk, do need to do the victory lap.
It's that lack of self-awareness. That's his weakness, isn't it, really?
And I think the fact you can see the Republicans, they've lost was not just, for instance, that, the polling which shows they 63-37 in a very divided country, as Alex said, shows that he won, but also the fact that Republicans thereafter, we're not talking about either candidates, but going after the moderator, saying the moderator was biased. And it's like a losing football team talking about the referee.
We've got a follow-up text question from Stephen in East Grinstead that actually Eleanor has already answered. But Stephen asks, is Donald Trump barking mad when he claims illegal migrants are eating the dogs and cats of a town in Ohio? Alex?
I haven't. I've got to confess, I haven't seen the data on that. James, you watched the thing. Why don't you listen to it? What did he actually say? What was the claim?
He was talking right now about sort of migrants who are coming in, illegal migrants, and sort of eating cats and dogs there. And I think really it's sort of Trump's tendency is to sort of recycle what goes on in sort of conservative talking points.
Is there any evidence for this at all?
Well, the moderators actually corrected him and said that ABC had checked with the city manager of Springfield, Ohio, and the city manager said this had not happened. Trump then pushed back and said, well, he would. He's the city manager. Now, Vance then went out and said that actually there have been residents, and Vance, of course, is the senator from Ohio, there have been residents of this town that have complained that their pets have gone missing in the midst of a crime wave that illegal immigrants have been allegedly participating in that town.
But it's quite a big jump to go from pets have gone missing to the immigrants are eating the cats.
Stealing your dog and eating it.
Yeah. And Kamala came back at him and said, I think that sounds a bit extreme. And I think that was absolutely, she was really spot on, because she'd obviously been coached to be very smiley. She didn't really kind of attack him that kind of viciously, so she really played against the kind of angry black woman trope. I mean, there's lots of, you can see how carefully she's been coached on this. All the time she's smiley, she kind of shakes her head occasionally, but she was very careful not to seem aggressive, while also being very acute and going for him on the emotional
tone. There was the hand on the chin.
The hand on the chin, but she was very statesmanlike. She didn't lose her cool, I didn't think at all.
He was trying to provoke her, wasn't he?
He was trying to provoke her. She really didn't rise, and I think that she's been brilliantly prepared. prepared.
Yeah.
I mean, they've obviously really war-gamed all the kinds of things that can happen and how to kind of make Trump rise to the bait. And there was quite a lot of stuff before about how Trump hadn't done any prep, that he was doing his usual arrogant thing of just kind of strolling in and thinking he'd ace it.
Yeah.
And actually this time I think it really showed that she'd done her homework.
What, 6 days in that Pittsburgh hotel room?
Yeah,
okay.
but I mean, it paid off.
Yeah. More of your questions for our fantastic panel. John McDonnell, MP for Hayes and Harlington, Alex Burghart, the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, the journalist and author Eleanor Mills, and James Heale of The Spectator. You can call your questions in at 0345 6060 973. Text them at 84850. The time is now 16 minutes past 8.
LBC.
Jump.
Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
And our next question for the panel comes from Jonathan in Bath over text. He asks, why is our government and the American government still holding back from letting Ukraine take the fight to Putin? All of this, of course, a reference to the fact that when the US and the UK and other NATO allies provide weapons to the Ukrainians, restraints are put on the Ukrainians over whether they can use those weapons to their full effect in a bid to avoid those weapons being used to attack deep into Russian territory. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken have been meeting this evening with Ukrainian officials in Kiev. There were suggestions that they might announce the Ukrainian military is being allowed to use those Western-donated missiles against targets on Russian territory, but this permission still has not been given, at least publicly. Alex Burghart, why are the Brits, the Americans and others holding back from letting Ukraine take the fight to Putin, and shouldn't they take the restraints off?
I don't know exactly why David Lammy and his counterpart haven't signed this off. But what I would say is that before you risk escalation with one of the world's most foremost nuclear powers, you really do have to think pretty carefully. And I think obviously what Russia has been doing in Ukraine is totally unacceptable. That it's important that we do everything we can to try and help the Ukrainians achieve their independence. But at the same time, I do think that we should give the Foreign Secretary and the Americans, who are in possession of all of the intelligence that is available to Five Eyes, a little bit of space to make that decision, because the consequences of things going wrong in this space are really quite severe.
What do you say to the argument that if you're not going to let them use the weapons in an unrestrained fashion, it would be better not to provide them with the weapons at all, rather than going 3/4 of the way to supporting them and allowing them to try and push Russia back, but not all the way?
I don't think that argument really works, and that obviously these missiles have a use without striking Russia, and that's why they've been given in the first place. And when they were accepted by the Ukrainians, they were accepted on those terms. Now, I have to say that I'm although I'm not privy to all of the intelligence information, I'm in favour, on the surface of it, I'm in favour of Ukraine being able to use these missiles to strike within Russia because of the way that that Vladimir Putin has behaved to this point. And, it's clear that the war has gone from being quite a localised conflict to a very large part of Ukraine, to the Ukrainians now making incursions into Russian territory in order to rebalance the front. So my tendency would be that we should allow the Ukrainians to use this. But as I say, I defer to those who are in possession of the intelligence.
John McDonnell.
I'll declare an interest. I founded about 10 years ago the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign that was brought together. It was a socialist, a Labour Party members, trade unionists, as well as trade unionists out in Ukraine. It basically started when oligarchs were taking over the mines, and we were supporting the miners' union out there. And we've worked over the last 10 years. And we had our conference last Saturday, and we were talking to our Ukrainian colleagues from Kyiv and elsewhere. Interesting was we were talking, the sirens are going off. And a number of the people who I worked with 10 years ago, miners leaders and others who founded our Solidarity Campaign are no longer there. They've disappeared, or some of them have died at the front. And so I think we should listen to the Ukrainians as much as we possibly can. And what they're saying, and these are, for me, I relate to socialists and trade unionists because that's the movement I'm in. What they're saying is we want the weapons to defend ourselves. This is what this is about. And one of the arguments is that originally one of their arguments was to have the same sort of protective dome that we put over Israel when they were being attacked by Iran. I don't think they're into an aggressive war. All they want is a defensive mechanisms and also where they can, perpetrate the war to get their land back. They're resorting to the longer range attacks because they haven't got that defensive mechanism in place. That's what this is about. So I think we need to listen to the Ukrainians and do everything we can for those who are looking to us to help them in the defences. And that does mean supply of weapons. And I know that's unpopular with some people, but when this whole kicked off, I was really anxious about it. I was worried about NATO's role years ago, about what it was doing, what provocations were made. That world changed when they invaded, when Putin invaded. The world completely changed.
But are you saying...
Let me just say, my Ukrainian friends were saying it's all well and good for people to say to negotiate and all the rest. There's a tank rolling down the road. We started standing in front of us and they shot our colleagues and comrades. So what I'm saying is we need to listen to the Ukrainians. What do they need? Most of this is about defensive weapons that they need. I agree exactly what's been said. The last thing we want to provoke is even more of an aggressive war going on from both sides. But we've got to listen to the Ukrainians about what defensive mechanisms they need.
About what they need, but what they're saying they would like is for the West to untie their hands by allowing them to use the weaponry that has been provided to potentially go deeper into Russian territory.
I think they're doing that because they haven't got the defensive shield that they wanted originally. If we offered them in the same way that we offered Israel that defensive shield, they would not be into this really straining to make aggressive attacks in that way. The issue is always about how can we preserve loss of life and prevent how we can prevent this escalation. If we support them on the defensive mechanisms, we can do that.
Eleanor.
I actually disagree. I don't really want them using British missiles to attack inside Russia. I think that puts us as the UK in peril. We know that the Russians have got, missiles which can hit us. So I think that there's a difference between giving the Ukrainians a defensive missile to attack Russian kind of things which are coming into Ukraine and to stop that, rather than actually using our missiles to attack things deep inside Russia. I think that that's a completely different ballpark. I mean, David Lammy today announced that we're giving them £680 million worth of aid. If you think that this whole kerfuffle around payments for the elderly, winter fuel payments, is talking about £1 billion worth of savings. That's a lot of money in the kind of current thing to be putting into Ukraine. I don't think we need to give them permission to use British missiles to attack, inside Moscow. Or where does it stop? What happens if the Ukrainians use a British missile to hit the Kremlin? Then we become front line. I don't think the British people want that.
There has to be conditionality on any weapons that are provided.
James Heale, it is all about escalation as the risk, isn't it?
I think it's largely that. Yeah, I mean, there's two reasons I can think of. First of all, is strategic, and of course that this isn't just about Ukraine and Russia. There's also the fact that if we're seen to be facilitating missile attacks into Russia, the danger is, of course, Russia will inflict some kind of revenge on us. Obviously, not necessarily the obvious ones about sort of chemical and nuclear weapons, which they're in possession of, but also other things as well to avoid, in different systems in other European theatres as well. And of course, it's not just the UK and US in all of this, it's also keeping our European allies on side, and they have different domestic pressures they've got to consider as well. So part of it is the strategy and sort of the war aims we're in, because of course, even among our European allies, there's a sense of, do we want to go back to the 2022 borders, the 2014 borders? Obviously, we'd all like Ukraine to win, but of course we don't want to see potentially regime change in Moscow if that's going to mean someone even worse than Vladimir Putin down the line. So that's the first point. The other point, I think, is about international considerations as well and domestic political pressure. We've got US presidential elections we've talked about coming up in 50 days' time. For instance, Donald Trump has had a real strain of his party talking about isolationism, and there was a lot of confusion about whether he was going to actually back or not the package that went through Congress in terms of funding Ukrainian arms. Now, obviously, Ukraine is sacrificing blood. We are sacrificing treasure in one sense, in sort of terms of the billions being spent to keep Ukraine's war effort going. One is clearly more important than the other, but I think it is a factor to consider, which is about how much international partners are going to keep funding and get this war going on.
We've got a follow-up question on all of this from Shabir. He says, following on from the arms supplies to Ukraine, Antony Blinken justified sanctions on Iran because it and Russia had violated numerous resolutions. How can one justify supplying arms to Israel when Israel has violated a lot more resolutions spanning over 40 years? Alex?
Well, look, if you look at American foreign policy towards Iran, it's very clear that the actions that America's taken are not just because of its violation of UN resolutions. It's due to the incredibly hostile behaviour that Iran has perpetrated against America and its allies over a very long period. So I don't quite accept the validity of the question. And obviously, in the case of Israel, we've just been talking about Ukraine, country that was invaded by its neighbour, and we all remember what happened in October last year. There was a major incursion into Israel that caused terrible harm to its citizens, and Israel is now taking steps to protect its security. And obviously, everyone in Britain wants to see it act in accordance with international law, but Israel has a right to defend itself and try and get its hostages home.
John McDonnell, there are lots of people out there that will immediately start texting in and saying Israel is going way, way, way beyond taking actions to defend its own security. How comfortable are you with weapons sales to Israel at a time when you're arguing we should make these weapons sales to Ukraine?
I'm not, because, there's a difference, because Ukraine are not committing war crimes. At the moment, the Israel is committing war crimes, and we have in Netanyahu, we have someone who is now they're potentially going to be prosecuted as a war criminal. So I don't think we should be selling arms to Israel at all.
Would you have gone further than David Lammy? Would you have cut all arms?
Well, it's interesting. I would, because it's very difficult I was trying to understand the logic of the government's position. I'm glad they've shifted, and I've met with the lawyers who have been involved in a number of these cases. And some of the argument was that, some of these weapons can't be traced, it would seem illogical for me. So I would introduce an overall ban. And we've done that in the past. Mrs. Thatcher did it. David Cameron did it. And I don't know why we've hesitated, particularly when the evidence of war crimes now is so horrendous. And there's war crimes by Hamas, of course, but we're not supplying arms to them. We're supplying arms to Israel. And there's been another massacre overnight today.
Eleanor?
I think what's going on in Gaza is just horrendous, and that was actually interestingly coming in here tonight. There's a huge protest on Whitehall, which is Jewish people saying that what's going on in Gaza is unconscionable, and that how the Israelis are retaliating. I mean, it's awful, and what Hamas did in killing 1,000 people in Israel was awful, and taking hostages. But Israel's killed 40,000 people in Gaza. I mean, last night on the TV, children blown up in their tents.
Yeah.
You know, I think 2/3 of the people who've been killed are women and children who have not been attacking Israel. So I think it's a really horrible, complicated situation because Hamas are not, you know, we absolutely know, are no angels, and they've behaved in a terrible way. But I think all civilized people's view of the Israeli response is that it can't be right.
And James, very quick response on this issue.
I think British sympathy, traditionally with the underdog, that's been something we've always seen. I think in Ukraine it's very clear who that is, and I think a lot of people, the majority of this country, view that potentially now with Israel's proportionality as being the Palestinians right now, but obviously they would disagree if you're pro-Israel.
OK, our next question is going to bring matters back here at home. We will get to that in a moment, and to more of your questions for John McDonnell, the MP for Hayes and Harlington, Alex Burghart, the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, the journalist and author Eleanor Mills, and political correspondent for The Spectator, James Heale. It is Cross Question on LBC, where the time is 29 minutes to 9.
The Foreign Secretary has announced more support for Ukraine during a joint trip to the country with his US counterpart. The UK will provide a further £600 million. The Business Secretary says a deal to protect steel jobs at Port Talbot is the best he could achieve within 2 months of taking office. Jonathan Reynolds has criticised inaction by the previous government before the election. And a ban on no-fault evictions and help with living conditions are among proposals for new protections introduced for renters. The bill, which has been put to MPs today, also promises to end mid-contract rent rises. LBC weather, showers easing for most areas tonight, a low of 5. Breezy tomorrow with showers in the north and west. Drier later in the day, a high of 15.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
And the panel is here taking your questions tonight. It comprises John McDonnell, the MP for Hayes and Harlington, Alex Burghart, the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, the journalist and author Eleanor Mills, and James Heale, the political correspondent for The Spectator. And our next question comes from Anthony in New Brighton in Cheshire. Good evening, Anthony. What's your question for the panel?
OK, good evening, panel. I've been basically a socialist for 40 years. Been in and out of the Labour Party. I left for a while when the Iraq War happened in 2002, when Gordon Brown came in. I was very disappointed that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell didn't get in again, but I think they might have done better than, let's say, Boris Johnson. But anyway, the question I want to ask the whole panel is the Labour Party really socialist when it cuts winter fuel payments to some old age pensioners who maybe only have a small private pension, so they can't
OK, Anthony. I think we got the question. John McDonnell, is the Labour Party still a socialist party if it is reducing the winter fuel payment?
Tony Benn always used to say, Labour's not a socialist party, but it has socialists within it. And I think that's exactly where we are at the moment. And at the moment, for me, and this has caused me such frustration, an incoming Labour government, it is doing, from my perspective, a number of socialist things: rail renationalisation, the housing programme, the renters' rights bill that they published today, the bus licensing, a whole range of things that actually most of them are drawn from the manifestos of 2017 and 2019 that I helped draw up. But we mustn't say that because we mustn't mention the name Jeremy Corbyn. That's the thing, which is ludicrous. So I welcome all that. And then we get to the yesterday, and they do something which is the most unsocialist thing I've seen a Labour government do, which is basically cut the winter fuel allowance, and knowing that as a result of that, people won't just suffer, some will die. And I put a parliamentary question down just saying, give us the stats on how many more people will be pushed into fuel poverty. All I got was a report will be produced in due course. So it'll be produced after the decision. So I'm really angry about it. I'm glad so many Labour MPs abstained and some voted against as well. And I'm hoping we'll revisit that, because in my constituency, I represent a working class, multicultural community. I've lived there 50 years. I'm being stopped in the street now by people. I'll just give examples. Women in particular on lower pensions who don't qualify for pensions, they might have worked at the airport or something like that, got a small pension, so they're just above the edge, and therefore they won't get that. We can try and do our best to alleviate it in different ways, but I was trying to say to the Labour leadership, bring forward those alleviations and prove to us that actually no one will suffer as a result of this. And they didn't do that. The argument was about universal benefit. I support universal benefits, but if you are going to get rid of universality, well, then what you have to do is introduce a system where there aren't cliff edges, where people lose out so dramatically, and you protect those ones who are the most vulnerable. I'm afraid that didn't, so that's why I voted against. I'm still going to argue the case that we need to revisit this, and I actually do think the majority of Labour Party members and others support it. The other point I'd like to make, I've been in Parliament nearly 30 years now. The biggest mistakes are made in Parliament when they apply the heaviest whip, because it persuades people to vote against their better judgment. And that was Iraq, tuition fees, 75p pension increase, and also in 2015 to abstain on the 2-child limit. And I just say to people, better decisions come when you allow people to exercise their judgment. You need a bit of whipping toward the machine of Parliament, but if you overdo it, you will get unwise decisions, to say the least. OK, so I was going to ask this question next, but let me do it now, and then we'll come back to Anthony's broader question about whether Labour is still a socialist party. Alex in Hebden Bridge has texted in to say, does John feel a sense of double standards in the Labour Party? His suspension feels particularly unfair, given that there have been no consequences for Jas Atwell's landlord scandal. Have you heard from the whips after your second vote against the government this week on winter fuel cuts? Is there a way back to the Parliamentary Labour Party for you? When they withdrew the whip from me, it was a 6-month suspension. And during that 6-month suspension, you have to abide by the whip as well. One of the sanctions is I'm not allowed to go to the Parliamentary Labour Party, meetings. That might be a relief, to be honest, at times. What will happen after 6 months? The position will be reviewed. They'll take into account my behaviour during that period. So as I voted against again, I would expect either the 6 months to be renewed or whatever, and I'll just have to serve my time. It's, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime sort of thing. But I think I can win the argument on this, because a large number of Labour MPs yesterday, it wasn't just the ones who abstained and voted against. A large number of them were very, very angry about what they had to be forced to do. Do you want to get back in? Of course I do. I've been to the Labour Party 50 years. I've been in... that must be about 10 times longer than Keir Starmer, isn't it? I don't know. But of course I do. It's my party. I've devoted my life to it, to be honest. And I am sad, and I can get a bit emotional about this, but I am sad that they've withdrawn the whip from me, because actually I think I was right. I think I was standing on a socialist principle about ending child poverty. But I can understand that you need an element of discipline in the party. So I expect to have the whip withdrawn. I did that. I knew there would be serious consequences, and I took that risk. But, you know, I believe actually you should allow people to express their views and listen to them, take them into account, and expect sometimes people will want to vote on the basis of their conscience.
Especially when you've got a parliamentary majority of 120.
Yeah, but I think even if you've got a small majority, but whatever the majority is, I think you need to allow people to exercise their wise judgment. But also, Keir said, you put country before party. I put my constituency before party in that instance because I know how suffering will be brought about in my constituency as a result.
OK, Alex Burghart, when you look out across the benches, are you looking at a party that you consider still to be socialist?
Well, I'll defer to John on what real socialism is, but I'll give you my experience.
Do you not know it when you see it?
I did actually. The first seat I ever stood in was Islington North, which your listeners will know is the seat of the Right Honourable General Corbyn.
So you did know it when you saw it?
Well, before Jeremy was well famous. I came second.
He won the argument.
First hustings I ever did, Islington Town Hall. It was a bit nerve-wracking for me. And, we were asked a question about the NHS, and, I stood up and said, well, I think a degree of internal competition would be a good thing for the NHS in England, as you see it compared to Wales. Jeremy stood up and said, we will completely renationalise the NHS, we'll drive out all private sector involvement. And then Bill stood up. Now, Bill was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, because only in Islington North would Jeremy be considered to be too centrist. And Bill stood up and said, well, we will abolish money. And I thought, well, OK, right, now that's, that is a form of pure socialism. Now, I think
that was the position of the Communist Party, Marxist-Leninist, rather than the Socialist Party.
Well, there was a man from the Communist Party in the audience who advocated violent revolution, but and a lot of people nodded thoughtfully to themselves as he spoke. But I don't think that this. There are, as John put it very well in sort of words to Tony Byrne, there are socialists within the Labour Party, but it's not a socialist party. But I think what we're seeing with the Labour Party now is that the front bench of this Labour Party doesn't actually believe in anything at all. And I think that that's very dangerous because you get a form of managerialism which goes off in all sorts of directions, and it can't really defend its actions or coordinate the behaviour of its party. And if it doesn't get its act together, it will come a cropper pretty darn quick.
James?
Well, I read with interest today reports that the Prime Minister was spotted at Kensington Roof Gardens this weekend. So maybe it's more socialite than socialist, shall we say. But I think... Look,
that was heavily worked.
That was bad.
I think, look, the tradition of the Labour Party has always been one of more social democracy than socialism. And I think that what Labour MP would say if they were here tonight would be potentially, and a defender of the government, would be perhaps looking at the tradition of the Labour Party, which is looking at the post-war era and the tough decisions they've had to make. For instance, introducing prescription charges in 1951, which prompted the resignation of Nye Bevan from the cabinet, looking, for instance, at the IMF package of 1976 and the Dennis Heale cuts of that time. And so I think that they would argue, the Labour government would argue, that they're operating in a tradition of realism and trying to say, look, we're going to make some cuts here, efficiency savings here, but actually overall we're moving in a sort of egalitarian direction. They would point, for instance, to the VAT on private school fees. So I think that they can defend it, but I would potentially take issue with the fact that the Labour Party has really been a true socialist party, shall we say.
So, Eleanor, tough decisions that sometimes may not appear socialist, but still in the interests of the ultimate goal of socialism?
I don't think that this is a socialist version of the Labour Party. I mean, I should probably volunteer here that I'm the stepdaughter of Tessa Jowell, MP, who was a very much New Labour. And so I kind of grew up with all of those, David Blunkett and all those people kind of all around me. And I think for Alex to say that this bench, this new Labour front bench don't believe in anything is really unfair. I mean, have you actually ever sat down and talked to Yvette Cooper or Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves? I think that there's some really seriously interesting, principled people who are part of Starmer's, David Lammy, a good friend of mine, who are part of Starmer's cabinet. And I think that they do believe in things. And I think that we're also in a situation in this country which is a total mess after all these years of Tory rule. Yes, we had COVID. Yes, we've had massive problems in austerity and all the rest of it. And everybody knows that there is no money in the coffers and that everybody is going to have to take some kind of a cut to kind of get things back on an even keel. And as the only woman sitting here on this panel, I think we've got, we know we've got huge problems within the NHS. I know that gynecological waiting lists are the longest. There are a lot of women who I represent who are out of work in their 50s and 60s because of the terrible waits within the National Health Service. We know that there are huge problems within this country. So just kind of saying that, throwing that they're not being socialist around the winter fuel, I think is unfair, and I think that the universality of those benefits is wrong. If I see quite a lot of rich older pensioners, I can think of several who I know really well who don't deserve a £300 winter fuel allowance, and so I think it's right that they should actually. If you think of I would much rather the money was going to all the children living in poverty, which has gone up massively under the Tory government.
They could have taxed it.
Yeah, they could have taxed it. I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing to. I don't think it's a bad thing to take away.
I would certainly agree with you, and I'd agree with John that having and John said John did say he was in favour of universal benefits, but if you're not going to have that, then you shouldn't have a cliff edge. I totally agree with that. You certainly shouldn't have a cliff edge at pension credit. And I was Minister for Pensions. Yeah. I remember this was always kicked around. It was always an idea the Treasury had its sleeve, and we always said no to it because it was grossly unfair. And so, all right.
But also, lots of Tory voters are pensioners, right? You had a huge majority amongst the MPs that would have been really against your own interest to cut those pensions.
Yeah. It was also against decency to take money away from people who were close.
I'm not going to be lectured about decency.
I'm not lecturing you. I'm just explaining why we made the decisions that we made. Now, something I will say.
Child benefit for 2 kids.
If you want to go through the economic mess that the last your new Labour friends left the country and what led to the cuts in the first place. I know. If you want to run through the history, we can absolutely do that. But the fact is that you guys know that you have made. The Labour people have made a terrible hash of the past couple of weeks. Let's give it a very simple rundown. That what the Labour Party have managed to do is simultaneously take money away from poor pensioners and give it to union members who are earning £60,000 a year. No, and they've done that, and they've given that at a time without asking for productivity reforms within those industries and within those sectors. That is totally wrong and unacceptable, and the public agree that they have made a mistake.
I've got to get to a break.
It's money, John. Okay.
I've got to get to a break. We are clearly not going to agree this. I see we've had a text in from a listener called Paul who says, I don't agree with what I'm hearing on the radio. Paul, I think you're going to have to be more specific. It's Cross Question on LBC, where it's 13 minutes to 9.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
And we are back with more of your questions for our panel tonight. Joanne has texted in to ask if the Renters' Rights Bill pushes rents up, is it worth it? Now, this relates to landlords' groups warning that they may increase the rents they charge at the start of new tenancies if this new proposed bill that was presented to Parliament today by the government prevents them from increasing rent costs in the middle of a tenancy. And I also just want to let you all know that after Cross Question is over, the final hour of the programme tonight will be all about the Renters' Rights Bill. But let's start with James. Your view on the Renters' Rights Bill. Is it not just going to push rents up ahead of tenancies being negotiated?
Well, of course, this is the key question that's going to be sort of thrashed out in the Commons. It's a very lengthy bill, as I was discussing with John beforehand. In terms of the first question of that, which is that would it be worth it if it pushed up rents regardless? Clearly not, because it's about outcomes, I would argue. But I do think that there's a valuable message being sent by Labour to its voter coalition here, which is that the last election, millennials were the largest voting group for the first time in history. This is about showing that the Labour government is on the side of those between their early 30s and late 40s. Increasingly, this is a group which is renting more and more. So I think that after the kind of Conservative government, which got bogged down in a similar, or some way similar in legislation, this is trying to reset the dial. Biggest piece of legislation affecting this since the 1988 Housing Act. And I think what's happened since then is 2.5 million landlords in this country, and Labour's trying to sort of change the system and the incentives under which it operates.
John McDonnell, you know what they say in Las Vegas? The house always wins. Don't the landlords always win?
No, and they won't do under this renters bill. And we're talking about whether this government was socialist or not. Here's a socialist measure. And I'll give you an example as a constituency MP. Housing is most probably the biggest issue at the moment in my constituency. We have families who just get evicted by landlords. If they complain about the state of the property, they get evicted. It's as bad as that. And then what happens is the landlord will come along and say, oh, I'm moving you out because I'm introducing a member of my family here. You'd need a DNA test to check that was a member of the family. It's just an abusive system. And what is annoying me more, we've got some fantastic landlords, and they're being undercut by these rogue landlords, and that's what this bill is all about, basically. And I don't think it will increase rents, and if there is, I'll be arguing for rent controls, because that would be exploitative. But at the moment, all I can see, I'm really trawling through, is a detailed bill, but we've been waiting 5 years for this. Theresa May promised it, and I supported her on that, actually. Michael Gove then as well, but they watered it down each time. This one, I think, will be effective. I think it will provide stability and security to tenants. I also think it will protect good landlords against the rogue landlords. So I think it's a decent bill.
Alex, it is important to stress that the Conservatives were planning some kind of action on this. What position do you think you and your party will be taking over the Renters' Rights Bill?
Yeah, we ran out of road on this, and we'll certainly look at the detail, and I think there's bound to be some common ground in this. I think I'm slightly disappointed to say that John, as a socialist, was only going to go for rent controls rather than public ownership of all private property. I'll give you a chance to...
I'll tell you, the development of the council house programme under this government will be actually one of the biggest things that this government could do to solve the housing crisis. That's
I wish the government well with its plans to build more houses, but I'm afraid that there's an area where we made a number of mistakes in terms of how we let the market respond to the need for building, and I see no sign that the current government is going to fix those problems, but I genuinely hope it gets it right. And in terms of, Simon, you asked about whether it's going to drive up, the caller asked about whether it's going to drive up costs. I think there are a couple of things on my mind with this. The first is that we haven't seen the official detail of the bill. It was briefed this morning that tenants are going to be able to end rental agreements after just 2 months. And I understand there are some positive reasons for that, but if you're asking landlords to carry more risk, they're going to put up their prices. That is how the market works. The second thing is that if the sum total of the regulation here causes more landlords to exit the market, that's going to push prices up too. So there are, if you don't get the balance of these things right, it's very complicated. Don't get the balance right, you are going to push up rents. You're going to make life harder for renters.
Okay, Eleanor, I want to get to the next question, but your answer on this one?
I think John's right. I know several families personally who've been evicted for no fault of their own, whose children have had to leave school, have had a series of really unstable tenancies. In a situation, particularly in London and the South East, where it's so expensive to buy, you have to allow people who are renting to have some stability in their lives.
OK, next question on text from Lucy in Camden, who asks, more members clubs are asking the gents who go to them if they're OK with women being allowed to join. How are these organisations still allowed to lock out 51% of the population? This relates to news that the Fly Fishers Club is polling its members on allowing women to join, while the Savile Club is holding informal discussions with its patrons on admitting female members to the club. Both of these clubs are based near Mayfair and were founded in the 19th century. And, of course, the Garrick, almost 200 years old, has voted to admit female members, with Dames Judi Dench and Sian Phillips having joined the ranks of 1,500 male members of the Garrick. Eleanor Mills, let's start with you.
Well, this is actually quite personal because my dad is a big member of the Garrick and was one of the people who actually didn't want women to join. He did eventually change his mind. No, he and I have had some very heated discussions on this topic, so I could go on about this for a very long time. I think that the argument which Marianne Sieghart and others put across, which was that I'm a journalist, as a senior journalist, you'd see the chaps come back from lunch at the Garrick having sat next to a cabinet minister, having the skinny on what was going on kind of, within the Foreign Office or the kind of the Secret Service, because they had all this gossip. And as a woman, you were excluded from that because you were not allowed in. I used to get very cross with my dad for being, a member of a male-only club, for years. So I think it's absolutely right that women should be allowed in those spaces. I think that there are some male-only clubs which I don't think any woman would really want to be a member of.
James?
Well, I am actually a member of the Savile, so I declare an interest at the start there. But I think the honest answer is that, look, we have single-sex spaces which are legal under law. That's the position that both this Labour government and the last Conservative government were committed to. And obviously people are allowed to start their own clubs as and when they see fit. And so I think that's the key thing. And in terms of legal constitutions, there's fascinating debates around sort of, do you need two-thirds majority support or not? I suspect these debates are going to play out for the rest of the 2020s.
Are you campaigning for change at the Savile?
I'm going to be listening to both arguments, and I probably will be voting for change.
That's a cop-out.
John, I'm guessing you're not a member of the Savile.
No, I'm not a member of the Savile.
Not yet, John.
James will put you up. There is no chance of that. I just can't believe we're having this conversation in the 21st century.
But should there be legal action taken to stop them from
Yes, I think they should, yeah. We believe in equality, don't we? We should have equality enforced by law. Some of these people need to get a life, don't they?
Yeah. Alex?
Yeah, look, I'm certainly not a member of a male-only club, and I completely hear what Eleanor was saying about how things were back in the day, and it's good to see. I think personally, I'm not a member of the Garrick. It's good to see the Garrick moving in that direction. I think when it gets down to kind of core principles, I must confess to being a little bit conflicted in that I do believe in freedom of association, and if a group of people want to get together and be part of a club.
What if they said no black people?
I think I wouldn't like that either. But I also one does have to question the limits of the state from time to time, and I think where does one sort of draw the line? My heart is with what Eleanor said.
I go with the Groucho Marx aphorism that I would never.
Member of the Groucho.
I'm not a member of the Groucho and would never want to be a member of any club that would want me as a member.
But that's the Groucho's motto.
Let us finish with our fun question of the night, which comes from Gracie in Blackpool. She's clearly got Taylor Swift on her mind. Which international superstar would you like to have endorsing you? Eleanor?
Well, I'm going to go for the lady of the evening, which is Kamala Harris. I'm hoping she's going to be the first queen-ager president. I represent a whole community of midlife women who I call queen-agers at noon.org.uk. So we're really hoping that Kamala wins. Queen-agers rule.
John McDonnell.
I'm a Liverpool supporter. I was born in Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp.
Jurgen Klopp. Alex?
Well, James told me I wasn't allowed to say Kemi Badenoch. But I do have in my household a 7-year-old girl who is the self-declared #1 Taylor Swift fan in the world.
Swiftie.
She's in your house.
She lives in my house.
That's fantastic.
And I think if I was to get Ms. Swift's endorsement, it would make me very popular at
Patrick.
Tempted with Mel Stride, but I'm going to go for I think Nigella Lawson, an international icon and very much a hero of millennials and Gen X's everywhere.
I think you're all wrong. I think the correct answer to the question is Joan Armatrading, who I got to meet once
that's a
and
great
who is
one.
just sensational.
Superb, yeah.
I cannot thank you enough. This is
Thank
my
you.
final cross question before Ian Dale returns on Monday. When he returns on Monday, his panel will include the Labour MP and former Shadow Cabinet member Emily Thornberry, the former editor of the Daily Mirror Alison Phillips, and the businessman Steve Rigby. I cannot thank John McDonnell, Alex Burghart, Eleanor Mills and James Heale enough for making this such a vibrant hour and a tremendous conversation. Thanks so much to all of you. Into our final hour together this evening, and the government says it hopes that by next summer, landlords in England will be banned from evicting tenants. It's all part of that renters' rights bill we were talking about. Introduced to Parliament earlier today, the bill will also ban bidding wars on properties where landlords can engage in what I suppose might be called dynamic pricing. It will also stop them from banning tenants who are living on benefits or living with children. If you're a tenant or a prospective one, what might all this mean to you? Are you hopeful it may become easier to find a property? And if you're a landlord, tell us what you think of these moves by the government. Are you ready for